Afternoon, everybody. Oh, thanks, Danielle. Starting recording. For the ones of you who don't know me, my name is Ricardo Inácio. I work for the Australian Digital Health Agency in the clinical informatics space. So I'm here today to present to you on a proposal the agency has put forward to include the healthcare service resource in AU Core R2. So this is a bit of a checkpoint that will allow you to build some understanding of where we are on this journey. If you have any questions about this proposal, this is also an opportunity to go through some of those questions. One thing that I'd probably like to say before I get started in the presentation is I'm probably the least technical person in this room, so unfortunately the person who developed most of the technical work couldn't join us today because they had a bit of an emergency they had to attend to. So I'll try to cover the best I can, but also noting that if the discussion gets too deep into the technical space, I might have to take things away offline and get back to you. So apologies for that. I'll get started then. So before we get into the content, I'll just like to begin with acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we all gather today. We pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the first peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. What is an information session? So some of you would have attended a few of these sessions before, but this is it's always good to kind of refresh our knowledge on what these sessions are about and what they're trying to achieve. So information sessions, they're informal sessions, and they allow people who are interested in this space to have a discussion, which in this case will be along the lines of what's being put forward on this proposal that you will see further down the track. Unfortunately, there won't be a facilitator who's super familiar with the resource, so apologies again. So if I need to take something offline, I'll make sure I'll do that and get back to you.
I think we should be all right, Ricardo. I think there's a few people on the line who've got some experience in that as well, who could offer some ideas.
Yep, that's awesome. One thing that I was going to ask is if anyone's got any questions, just because I'll be sharing my screen, I'd appreciate you just probably raise them at the end of the presentation. I think it will just be easier to manage this as we go. So there's not a lot of slides, and I think we will move very quickly to discussing or presenting the proposal and then discussing the proposal. So if you could save your questions to the point where we talk about the proposal, that would be extremely helpful. In terms of the session and how we're going to run this session today, so we'll provide a quick update on the HealthcareService resource. We'll talk about the usage of this resource, and we will present our proposal to this group, which is probably the core content of what we want to present today. Before we get into the detail of the presentation, it's just a quick Menti I was hoping to do with you. So bear with me because I haven't done this over Zoom before, but I'm hoping that it will work fine. So if you could all just grab your mobile phones and scan this QR code, that would be great, and we'll get us going. So I'll now move to the Menti screen and let me know if you can see. Yep, cool. It's going through. So it's always good to understand who we have on the call because it's often good good insights that we can use to help guide the discussion and how we approach the audience. So thanks for that and for contributing
Ricardo,
information about your role background. Yep.
I think about 4 or 5 people have come in. Could you pop up the QR code on the screen again?
I can. I'll paste the code on the chat as well. If people, I can't because got admin restrictions.
It's also possible, I think, on the Menti view that one of your options down the bottom can
end up slightly smaller.
I think
if you're clicking present, I think one of your options down the bottom when you scroll, okay, so
cool.
Yep. So for those people who've just joined us who didn't see the Menti code and QR before, there's one up on screen now. If you can get into that with your phone and start answering the questions.
All right. So we have a very good amount of answers, which is always good. I don't think this is really breaking the mold too much from what I've seen in the past. Architects, they seem to be the bulk of the attendees at these sessions. So it's quite good. All right, I'll give everybody 5 more seconds and we'll move to the next question. And I'll count down. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. So the next question has to do with your previous experience attending one of these sessions. And again, it gives us good insights to who we have on the call. Okay, got a good number of answers. So again, I'll just count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to the next question. It's one question you might have seen also in the past. Numbers are still coming in, but I'll count us down again from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. On to the last question. So this is a free text question, and this information will be helpful for us as we tweak what's what work there might still left to be done in this space. And it will be useful to understand also what kind of experiences you have utilizing this resource. Seems that there's still some responses coming in. Cool. All right, so we've got pretty good numbers, 33 responses. Again, thanks for that. As I said, this was the last question, so I'll you can still submit your input, but I'll close this one off now, and I'll
Could
move back
I
to the other screen. Yep.
ask a question? I'm really intrigued about the medication summary because it's not one that I hear come up often with healthcare service. So if anyone's happy to talk to that, I'd be really interested to understand that one. I think where there's medication or medication summary and how that is relating around healthcare service. All right, maybe another time.
So, okay. So thank you all. Very valuable inputs, and something we'll look into a little bit more closely in the coming days. So I'll continue with the presentation now. So the healthcare service overview. So the healthcare service resource is used to describe a single healthcare service or category of services that are provided by an organization at a location. So this is extracted letter by letter from the resource definition, but it's a good opportunity for us to refresh our knowledge on this resource and what it is about. This is a visual of the current structure in FireR4 for the healthcare service. And the next slide here is the work that's been done to develop a profile in AUBase on the back of this resource. So it's just another visual that depicts the work that's already happened in Australia to localize a version of healthcare service and embed it into AUBase. So this is a snapshot of the differential table that kind of illustrates the work that's already happened. So it's not a profile that hasn't really been looked into in Australia previously. So the work has already happened, and this is what it looks like. Okay, check this online. In terms of the usage of healthcare service, so this is information that's been captured directly into the proposal and information that you'll be able to find should this make its way into AU Core. You'll be able to find in the structure definition for this resource. So the usage scenarios, they include the querying for basic information about a healthcare service. They include the recording or updating of records basic information for a healthcare service. And there's also in here the reading of information about a healthcare service referenced by another resource. So there's resources, as it's usually the case, that reference healthcare service, and through this, it's also possible to access information that's related to it in the context of another resource. This is just a quick stock take of where you might find FHIR profiles of healthcare service in Australian IGs. So as I mentioned previously, you will find it in AUBase, but you will also find it in the HL7 provider directory FHIR IG. You will find it in the healthcare or the Health Direct Australia and NHSD FHIR IG, and you will also find it in the PCA, the Australian Digital Health PCA FHIR implementation guide. It's what we could find. There's also some scenarios where you'll find this this profile in other international IGs, but in Australia, this is what we could track down for this profile. So this is information we presented at the last breakout on healthcare service at Last Connectathon, but we thought that it would be good to kind of just refresh everybody's knowledge of this again. One last thing on this part of the presentation is just also a quick reminder that in the lead up to the development of this proposal, we ran a poll on Zulip, and this is what we got from the FIRE community in terms of adoption of healthcare service. So I won't go through this in detail, but it's just a reminder that this content is available in Zulip. So if you want to go and have a look at it, please go ahead. We've closed the survey a couple of days ago, but you can still submit data to it over the coming days or weeks, and if possible, we will take that into account. So yeah, go and have a look at it, and if there's something that you think might be relevant, that is not necessarily in the context of providing feedback on our proposal, but something a bit more generic, feel free to go and add that to Zulip, and we'll definitely have a look at it. Okay, now to the kind of proposal and where we've gotten to with the healthcare service FIRE profile for inclusion in AU Core R2. Before I show you what's being proposed, I'd just like to highlight some of the guidelines or the principles that we followed in preparing this proposal. So this was about creating something that sets minimum requirements, and this is pretty much in line with everything else that's been happening for across the board for AU Core. But with taken into account that this is something that sets minimum requirements, so it's something that, in light of setting minimum requirements, also needs to be valid to support across all the different use cases where we might utilize healthcare service. So this was a big thing for us going into this piece of work. Sets minimum expectations of what a system implementing this could look like. It's a very light touch proposal, so we didn't. Again, this is almost like one kind of principle or guideline flows into the other, but this is still a very light touch proposal, because if we have to create something that covers a variety of use cases, then there's probably some restrictions in terms of the amount of modeling that can be done. So the proposal is very light touch. And finally, it flags some elements with must support / obligations. So again, very much in line with everything else that's been done for AU Core in Australia. This is the proposal at a glance. So on the left, you can see the snapshot table. That's the differential table. So the modeling or the work was done by deriving the existing profile from AU base, and this is the differential table you can see here on the left, and also on the screen you see the search parameters that have been incorporated into the proposal. A couple of things that I'd probably like to highlight that weren't on the previous slide. So in addition to the must support / obligations, one thing that we've done extensively, which is in line what's happened in other profiles in AU Core, was changing the strength of the terminology binding. So where applicable, we've increased the strength of the terminology binding. The other thing that's probably worth calling out was the proposal of making name a mandatory element, and then outside of that, yeah, probably not many other, I'm assuming, things that I'd probably consider to be too worth of flagging. But this is where we blended, and at this stage, I'd probably like now to stop for a little bit and see if anyone's got any questions, or even if you've already had the opportunity to go into build.fi.org and see the proposal. If you've got any questions, any comments, I'd be happy to have a discussion now, or we can always do that down the track offline or through the Confluence page that's been stood up. But yeah, I'll stop now and just ask if anyone's got any questions they want to raise. Danielle?
I have one that is about type and specialty. So what do you see is the different, I guess, usage of those two elements for healthcare service?
I'm happy to take that one on notice, Senator. Look, I think beyond what I can see on the description of the elements, I don't think there's probably much more I can offer. I'd be happy to hear from others who might be a bit more experienced using this profile, but I probably don't have it ready on the back of my mind, of my head for you now. Sorry about that.
Just in response to that, Danielle, when I was working on the mapping from the synthesized data we received from Services Australia, they have multiple levels of provider types and specialization within that, etc. So basically, the way that I worked on it was that type was kind of the higher level category of the service, and then that can get more specialized internally. So for example, it could be an imaging type, and then you can go into the specifics of whether you're doing MRIs and all those sorts of things as a specialty.
Yeah, it's kind of is a bit in line with what's here in one of the examples, I think. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for that.
But that's obviously my interpretation. That's
Which I think, and Michelle and Rachel will probably have something on there. But I guess the thing that I'm pondering is in terms of minimum requirements, then, is the first thing we do out of the gate both of them? Which use cases are using, which one? Like, which one's more common? Like, what are people using in terms of specialty or type, or is any of that actually driving a particular case? And maybe we do go to Michelle.
Thank you. I think it was more of a question. Again, I'm still really new at this one, but are we setting the values that are going to be behind that they can choose, or are we just actually setting the field name? And I think Ricardo might have actually been trying to show us what was doing, but like, from an AIHW perspective or an IHACPA perspective, have they got these, do they use these fields, and are we sort of aligning to those ones? So everybody will actually have the same list of 10 or 20 or 30 specialties to choose from.
Yep, that's so that you can see that the binding, they're already there. So you will find that there's values that are there's a value set that's already in existence for people to choose from. There's some, and I'll probably just go and share this for additional context. So let's
Might be clearer if you go to AU base, like the derived one, Ricardo, because that is where those value sets are come in the first place.
Well, I'll just go and put them on here also on the screen. What I also wanted to show, so you can see the values here, but what I also wanted to show is what the description of extensible means in this case, which can also offer some additional context to your question. So, there's a value set that sits behind this, but if the value set does not cover the concept, alternate codings may be included instead. So ideally, you would, as per what's specified in here, the first path is to use the the value set, the structured data, or the coded data, in this case, the reference data. And after that, if it's not meeting your needs, you can go down a different path, but that's the exception, probably not the rule.
Yeah, Rachel, let's go to a hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Daljeet. I suppose I can just speak from the perspective of Provider Connect Australia, and I'm not sure if we have anyone from Health Direct on the line, but from the NHSD perspective around, I guess, type versus specialty. PCA currently utilises healthcare service type only at this point in time, and we enforce a kind of a cardinality of one. So each healthcare service has a kind of primary service type, and I believe the NHSD aligns with that. We are looking at some in our research around allied health, whether there may actually be a use case for allied health providers to use the specialty element to, I guess, provide other kind of descriptors about their allied health service that, you know, would be of value to either consumers or providers. But yeah, current state, PCA really only uses the type element at this stage. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Brett?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I kind of consider specialty as being a list of the people at the place, at the service, what they're capable of. So I think of that as much more like a definitional kind of service offering for the service. And I think it's worth noting too that the type field is also reflected in encounters. They have a similar binding to the service type. So it's kind of describes what encounter the service type was delivered. So yeah, I kind of think type is the primary and most important thing about the service delivery. And I kind of think of specialty more like a provider directory kind of tool to help you find specialties at a location. So yeah, that's my kind of take on it.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Michael, you got your hand up?
Mine's a different question, so I'm happy for this conversation to run out and come back to me later.
Can I just jump in then? Sort of back on Danielle's previous question. So the data that I mapped from Services Australia always had a type. And specialty was kind of an optional thing. It was a further specialization. And as Brett basically just said, it could be something like general medicine, but then someone who's a GP can then be specializing in pediatric care or perhaps elderly care, etc. So they're the specializations. The other note really is that the type comes from a whole different hierarchy within SNOMED compared to specialties. So they really do have different meaning to some extent as well, those values that are coming from those value sets. So something to note as well.
Great, thanks, Heath. Daniela?
Yeah, so coming back to sort of, I think, thank you for that, into my question is, I guess, the picture also around encounter. So with encounter resources, where there's also service type that is listed as an element. And I've always kind of thought that that is or should be aligned or drawn from healthcare service that's associated with that. And so I think they're looking at kind of the same thing there. So they're, to me, really related, but I agree that they're different hierarchies if we're looking at SNOMED, aren't they? They're different kinds of services versus the different kinds of specialties. Okay, thank you.
Chris, I see you also have your hand up. Is it related to this discussion?
Yeah, I'll just
Yep.
basically agree with what's been said. We've been treating specialty as a way to map doctors and clinicians to these organizations, whereas the type is really about defining the actual type of service being offered. So yeah, we might say that this has a specialty of cardiology, and then we can match clinicians who also have a cardiology specialty to that.
Thank you. Before we get to you, Michael, I think what I'd probably like to ask, if you have examples of how you use this in your for your use cases, it would be, I think, good if you could send those examples across, because I think it would be helpful for us to include them in the final proposal, because there seems to be an element here that's a bit more around, what each one of the organizations or the implementers have done with this with this profile. So if there's some examples you could share, just feel free to send them through, and we'll be for sure including them in the final proposal. Michael.
Yeah,
Can I just
sorry,
can I just jump in one moment
Yep.
just to respond to Danielle, that the service type is actually the same hierarchy or the same value set as the healthcare service dot type. So just
Yeah, and that makes sense to me, and it's a different hierarchy to specialty. Yeah.
correct.
Yep, that makes sense.
Sorry, Michael, go.
No, you're right. It's all good. I want to make sure that was finished because mine's completely different. So my question was just around whether you considered active for must support for the directory sort of use cases, whether that was a consideration.
It was. Look, I can't say for sure when it was dropped, but it was there at the beginning. But I understand that after some discussions we had internally, we ended up not putting the active up here on the final proposal. So if you have a specific kind of point you want to make in that regard, yeah, let us know. But I do remember seeing it in the initial proposal, but it just through some discussions we've had internally ended up being dropped. Now, why? I probably can't say for sure right now. I can still go back and I can let you know offline, Michael.
Yeah,
I can take
it's fine.
guesses at it.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't flagged active as must support for any resources. So healthcare service and entity and that kind of thing. And we haven't flagged active as must support because it hasn't been agreed to be the minimum requirement for every single use case, no matter what. I totally agree with what you're saying, Michael, but I would expect that to be rocking up in provider director and a bunch of other use cases. But I think healthcare service is broader than that. I do also think
I can see, yeah, in like if it's not active, you're not going to exchange it, right? But it's probably more for the directory, scenarios where things become active and inactive and the like. But yeah, in a lot of more general scenarios, if it's not active, you're not going to exchange the data, right? So yeah, I was just wondering.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Michael. I think at a directory use case, it's definitely important, and obviously PCA and NHST service it for that reason, but probably doesn't belong in AE Core.
I think next.
Yeah, I think we don't have any clinical resources that we have that will point to this at the moment or reference healthcare service, but if we end up doing so, we do need to be careful about historical clinical data that might reference the healthcare service that has been deactivated. So it may not be must support, but yeah, there may be use cases for it.
Yep, that's good. Thanks.
Danielle, you were saying?
I was saying that while it's not, I mean, in a certain sense, okay, in a lot of senses, Heath is right, as always. We don't flag it with must support, but we do have clinical resources like Encounter that do reference healthcare service. They're just not viewed as at the moment minimum requirements around healthcare service in AU Core. So I think and part of that might be because we haven't actually done some of the reporting or otherwise for that. So I don't know if it'll ever get flagged as minimum requirement associated with a clinical resource for some of the same reasons we haven't flagged encounter, for example, it's all that kind of context stuff where we've been very light touch in AU Core based on where the community's at on what gets flagged with must support. And I think healthcare service is kind of part of that. But I mean, yes. So it's some of the resources supported in AU Core have references off to healthcare service. They're not viewed as minimum requirements yet.
And I think given what I've just heard about provider directory use case being a primary user of this, not wanting it to be part of their profile, there's actually a very good reason for it not to be must support in AU Core. Otherwise, they're going to have to interpret what must support means in the context of provider directory downstream.
Yep.
Anything else from anyone before we start talking about next steps?
Do you want to put the proposal back up?
Okay. Oh, is it? No. Too many windows.
I have an extra one to talk about, which is I'm not sure we need provided by. I think of that as a directory based requirement in some ways as well. Because that's if I'm exchanging an encounter and I just want to say which facilities provided the service, I don't necessarily want to have to tell you about who's the managing organisation every time. So I probably not to have it.
Yep, thanks, Brad. I've also seen you drop your feedback on the Confluence page, so it's good.
That's what it is today. I'll see what it is tomorrow.
So I'm curious probably on, and I'm just going to ask questions of the people who've dialed in terms of identifying a healthcare service. What are people using? I mean, there's some options there listed as like potentially HPIO and potentially like a residential aged care service identifier. But like, what are people actually using? Do you use identifiers, and what are you actually using to either search for, find, or supplying to someone else that uniquely identifies the healthcare service? Is it name instead of identifier? Rachel?
Yeah, again, I can speak from the PCA perspective and my understanding of NHSD as well. We do issue our own identifiers for healthcare services to uniquely identify them because HPIOs won't uniquely identify healthcare services. So yes, we definitely have a use case for needing to uniquely identify each healthcare service. Yeah, the whole assigning a HPIO to a healthcare service is that's a bit of a can of worms. I think that maybe might need a separate discussion around the scenarios where one would do that. And yeah, yes, but yeah, we obviously we do assign business identifiers for healthcare services. Yep.
So when people are
yeah, so we use them primarily for like data matching purposes for sharing information between PCA and NHSD. Yeah.
So for someone like looking up a healthcare service in PCA, what parameters are they using to do that?
So PCA doesn't really act so much as a directory, a searchable directory. But from a NHSD perspective, it's really the healthcare service type is the key search parameter. And again, within the NHSD data model and PCA, healthcare services don't just live independently of anything. They actually are provided by an organisation at a location. And so, yeah, finding a healthcare service is often what healthcare services are provided at a location, or give me all the healthcare services at this location or provided by this organisation, or a kind of combination of, I want to find all the podiatry services, in a particular geographic area, which again makes use of the healthcare service location, referenced location as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the identifier I think is not so much used from a searching perspective. Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel.
Brett?
Yeah, just to add, where the HPO came from originally was requirements out of the provider directory project, where organisations were viewed as essentially managing organisations, more the business entities that were operating services, and there was a lot of cases where you would have, say, one business entity and there were messaging endpoints related to these healthcare services that were separate. So you would have, say, like a department in a hospital or a particular other subset of an organisation. So yeah, it effectively played out as being either network HPOs or other kinds of individual entities that didn't have a operating organisation as such. So that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah, that's a good point, Brett. And again, I think PCA is kind of, I don't want to say try to learn from that, but to avoid any possible confusion, we model HI organisations with HPIOs as FHIR organisations. So that's where the HPO sits for those seed and network HI organisations. We don't store HPIOs against healthcare services in PCA, but that's just our model. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there might be some larger entities like, say, Northern Territory Health is the example that I'm aware of, that have multiple healthcare services, obviously, multiple hospitals, for example, and each of those have a HPIO, but they're all under Northern Territory Health as an organisation. So if you were to start saying that there is an organisation that is the Darwin Hospital, then it's getting a bit out of control. And I think that goes back to Brett's point about it being more the legal entity, the organisation.
Yeah, so PCA models the legal entity organisations and the HI organisations for completeness and the relationships between those. And yes, it does. It's as you said, Heath. Depending on how people's seed and network HI orgs have been set up in the HI service, that's a lot of, that could be a lot of organisation resources in the back end. But that's one of our principles, was to accurately reflect that information in PCA and provide that wherever possible as a real world view as possible of the healthcare provider organisation's data from that legal entity perspective, and also as they've set it up in the HI service as well.
From what I'm understanding, I actually like what you've done, but the issue is, I think there are potentially multiple ways it could be modelled, and
exactly.
And I think Brett and I have been having this conversation for many years about the two different ways of doing it. And it would be, I don't know, it would be nice to have some common way, but it's probably not our job here at AU Core either.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, I'll just agree with what's being said. We've had a lot of experience trying to model both units and outpatient services within hospitals, and we've generally been identifying them via a code. And we were originally using organization resources to model units, but it's not a great fit. And we're sort of looking to be more comfortable modeling hospital units as a healthcare service. And then again, yeah, having the organization as the managing organization, which might be the facility, or it might be, for instance, in the UK, the trust.
So when you say code, Chris, are you talking about
An,
the
in,
type, or are
an
you talking
internal
about an
hospital
identifier?
code. So if I just give an example, yeah, it's an identifier. So
Yep.
specifically at like Sunshine Hospital, you might have SH card as Sunshine Hospital Cardiology Unit.
Yeah, but bar-wise, it's an identifier, not a
Correct.
codable concept.
Correct. It's definitely an identifier. And then the friendly name, which is what would be in the name field, would then just be, you know, a cardiology or Sunshine Hospital Cardiology. So we very much identify them via the identifiers.
Thanks. Josh?
I had a question. Couldn't you identify organization level by using the defined portion of part of? So in other words, in a multi-facility where you have an overarching organization defined as organization, and you have the rest of your other resources also defined in the organization, any children organization portions would have a part of reference to a parent organization?
Definitely could, Josh.
That's how we've been doing it. It's just that it's not a great fit once you get to a certain level of detail.
Mm-hmm.
There's some complexity there. If we're talking interoperability, did the way you model it match the way someone else modeled it? And I will just call out now that I never want to see on a UCO organization part of flag with must support, because it's turtles all the way down. So as soon as you have to go, I know something about the parent organization, I must provide it. And then that's an ad infinitum kind of link out to every single possible thing you could know. So it's kind of like, where do you stop? And do you really need to know that? Do you need to always supply an organization resource to know something about this? Yeah, it's interesting.
Mm.
Complexity grows really, really quickly, I think, with healthcare service.
Yeah.
Okay.
Discussions? Anything else from anyone? Silence says permission to move to the next steps. So as I've mentioned, so we have a proposal that's up online for review by the community. So the link has been dropped by Tushi on the chat. That's the right link, not the one I pasted. That was the wrong one. So we're currently looking for feedback by the end of COB of 9th of April, and there's Confluence page that's been created for that purpose. I can see some of you have already gone there and left some feedback, so it would be great if any feedback could be added in there by the 9th. So from there, we're planning on bringing the final proposal for a vote at the TDG main call on the 17th of April, and I guess from there, hopefully we'll be all systems go to get this into the AU Core R2 scope. So there's also as I've mentioned previously, there's also been some content that's been posted up on Zulip. If you want to go there and have a look, as I said, have a go at looking at what's been provided on that poll that's been put in there. But if there's any other items, any other discussion points you want to flag, Zulip is also a good channel for that. But if it's feedback, it would be appreciated if you could just drop it in Confluence. So that's what we're aiming for. So we have another 2 weeks pretty much to get this to the next site, which will hopefully be an inclusion in AU Core R2. And yeah, from my end, thank you all for your time. I'd also like to, I think, just use a few seconds to give a bit of credit to the team who's been working behind the scenes on this stuff. So Rob Eastwood, Uday, Stephen Chu, and a few others from the agency. They've been kind of working behind the scenes with a lot of other stakeholders on this proposal. So it's been a big one for us. Yeah, I just didn't want to leave without acknowledging the guys' work. And I can see you have your hand up, Heath.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was any feedback from today that you consider as a change to the current proposal, or whether you're going to bring forward that current proposal.
Look, I think what Brett has just said there, it's probably something that I take away as something we'll need to look at. And I note that Brett's left a few more items of scope in Confluence. I also think that we've had a really good discussion about the type and specialty, but I'm not sure how that might be resolved in more practical terms. I do think that on the back of that, gathering some examples from people who have implemented or actively using this would be a good way to try to provide more clarity around the different use cases. But yeah, outside of that, I probably don't think I've captured anything else that's too meaty, but I'll go through the recording and just make sure I'm not missing anything.
I just wanted to sort of briefly just cover that point, that on Heath, on if Ricardo will take anything away from this, which Ricardo will obviously take things away, as we all will, because we've had a good discussion. But in terms of making a change to a proposal, one of the things we do really well in the standards process at the moment is provenance. And it's really important that we're tracking who's arguing for a particular position or why. And I think it's disingenuous for Ricardo to try to represent someone who's made a comment on the call when they're not, when Ricardo isn't that person and doesn't fully understand all the use case implications. So I think it's really important for people who've seen this and gone, you know what, I have some feedback on that, to pop that on the Confluence page so that we can understand where that is being driven from, rather than, I guess, losing that important context.
All right, thanks for that, Danielle. Look, if there's nothing else, then we'll leave it at that. We'll again invite people to go into Confluence and leave their feedback in there. And yeah, hopefully the next time we'll see you will be when we're going for the final proposal. So yeah, thanks again, everybody. Nice to kind of connect with you all, and looking forward to next steps.
Thanks, Ricardo.
Thanks, Ricardo.
Great. Thanks, Ricardo.
Thank you all.
Thanks.